All right. So let's look at Calvin Hobbes is a pretty big one. I'll download this one. Oh, come on. I hate it when Google does that. There we go. So there's one GIF, and we'll get us a smaller one. Dancing banana. I'm a banana. If I was to open these in Photoshop, if I was to open them right now just as preview, you can see they're animated. But in Photoshop, it's going to treat it differently. Remember, Photoshop usually works in layers. But a GIF itself is more than just one layer. Every frame that you have has to have its own layer by itself. And so when you look through here, you can see I've got 8 different layers that I'm working through. In order to animate it, what they do is they cycle through the visibility of each layer. So if I turn them all on, it would actually look something like this. And it gives you an idea of the amount of motion that it's going through. But in order to animate it, I would need to draw off one cell at a time, one frame at a time, and place it on its layer by itself. But how do we animate it? In Photoshop, if you go to Window, one of the rarely used ones that we haven't gotten into is your animation window or your timeline, bingo, down here at the bottom. The timeline usually shows up at the bottom, will give you your frame by frame sequence that we're going to work through. Each one, so if I clicked on each different frame, tell you what, I've gotten this off by a bit. Let's reopen it and reset what we're working through. That's going to get annoying real quick. There we go, now that I've reset it. Each one, if I clicked on one time frame, will advance through to the next frame. Notice that whenever I click on one, the visibility will change in my layers. So if I clicked on layer 1, or frame 1, layer 1 is also done. Frame 2, layer 2. 3, 4, so on and so forth. And Photoshop's got them nice and conveniently placed in here. Pretty cool? This is the essence of what we're going to be creating when you create an animation. If you go to the Moodle page, under the exercise files, the first one we're going to work through is the GIF Maker files. And I've got 2 different kinds of GIFs that we're going to create. The first one will use a horse GIF. I'm giving you a frame-by-frame sequence. You can see they're numbered here, 1 through 14. There's also a number here. Forget about this number. But if I go through each one, even if I'm scrolling, it kind of gives you the illusion of animation. Pretty cool? What we need to do is we need to load this up and tell it the frame-by-frame sequence. By the way, does anybody know the history of these particular series of photographs?
It was like almost motion photography, but not quite.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
No one believed that the horse's legs came up off the ground.
Yeah. Very good, very good. I forgot the name of the photographer, but you're exactly right. There was a bet that no one for a longest time could prove that when a horse runs, does all of its feet come off the ground, or is there always one foot on the ground? So a photographer set up a series of cameras and rope triggers, and as a horse ran by, it triggered each of the frames. And he got his famous shot right here, which has the horse off the ground. He won the bet. But when you play them back in sequence, you get this animated kind of style. He went on and did a lot of different motion photography this way, especially with acrobatics and with different kinds of birds, different kinds of things that a lot of people haven't seen in stop motion. So to create your animated GIF, here's how we're going to do it. I'll close it down, don't save. We're going to open up each one of these in order. Pay attention to the order that we're working with. I'm going to start with JPEG 1 in Photoshop. And we'll keep it the same size that it's at. By the way, I've got my timeline already opened down here. I'm then going to load up each of the subsequent files, file number 2 through 14 in there. And I'm going to pay attention to each of the layers on here. So this is layer 1. layer uno. We'll drag on layer 2 straight into here. Since it's the same size, it'll place nice and neat in there. Here's layer 3. Layer 4. Whoops. Make sure you hit return. Now I'm doing them in this particular way. You'll see why in just a second. You may have caught on to an issue that's coming up. All I've done is drug each one of these into their own layer, 14 through layer 1. Cool? Do you notice the issue that comes up when I play these from 1 to 14? It looks like he's writing backwards. Versus if I did it backwards, it would go this way. The reason why I gave them to you in this order is so that when you place them in Photoshop, from top down, they're in reverse order. And so this will make it a lot easier for you to keep track of from here. The main thing is, when you load your images up, make sure it's loading 14 through 1 instead of 1 through 14. Okay, now let's actually create our animation. In your timeline, you're going to have a drop-down menu that gives you 2 different options. Photoshop can handle frame-by-frame animation, which is what we're going to be doing first, and also video, which is what we'll do in the second half of the class. So I'm going to create a frame animation by clicking here, and it should give you a timeline that looks like this. If it doesn't look like this, undo it and go back and make sure you've got frame animation. The next thing I need to do is to tell it a duration for how long I want each frame to be loaded on the screen. If you look at the bottom of each frame, right now it's loaded for 0 seconds. This means that when the frame comes up, it'll load for just long enough and then it'll go to the next frame. Just long enough and go to the next frame. If I want it to pause or if I want it to last a certain distance or a certain time, I can click on here and choose a certain number of seconds delay on here. Usually your eye needs a little bit of time to process the image that it's looking at. 1/10 of a second is plenty of time for a GIF to process the image. Anything faster than that, it tends to look a little bit choppy. So I'm going to set this to be 1/10 of a second. I've got frame 1 created. Now, to make a new frame, here's frame 2. Notice it'll keep that 1/10 of a second. Frame 1, what is it showing on here? Which layer? 14. 14 is turned on and it's on here. When I select frame 2, right now what frame is it showing? 14 still. I need it to show the next layer. So all I'm going to do is turn off the visibility of it. Repeat the same process. Frame 3, make your new frame, and then turn off the previous frame. New frame, next frame. New frame, and next frame. Really simple, right? Very, very easy. Let's do the whole thing and we'll play through the sequence. All I'm doing is making a new frame and telling it to go to the next frame that I need. Do, 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 do. Bingo. Down to the 14th frame that I have. And I'll repeat the process for each one. If I wanted to play this, I can select frame 1. Here's our playback mode. If I press play, there you go. The frame will loop itself through. Another thing you can do is to tell it how many times you want it to play, especially for a GIF. At the very bottom left-hand corner, right now it's only going to play once. It'll go through and stop at the end. If I wanted it to repeat over and over again, I can tell it forever. And when I press play, once it reaches that last frame, it goes back to the first and repeats itself again. Kind of neat? All right. So there's, let's stop it up. And I can tell it to repeat a certain number of times if necessary. That will, for this one, we're going to keep it repeating forever. To save a GIF, here's the next most important thing. Whenever you've saved a file before, we've always gone to File and Save As, and then choose the format that we want. One of the formats you can choose is, there it is, a CompuServe GIF. If I saved it this way, we'll call it horse on my desktop. It'll give me some options. For now, I'll just say OK to that. And here's my GIF on here. If I open it up to play, it's not playing. The reason why, a GIF does support animation, but you have to tell it to support animation. If I go to File and Save As, it doesn't give me that option. Here's where to go to in order to export it or to save it. We want to save it for web. They've got a new version on here. Let's see. They've placed it. There it is. Save for web. I think on my instructions, I tell you go to File and do Save As or Save for Web. Under Export, there's Save for Web. This will open up another panel. From here, at the very top left-hand corner, JPEG is the default. There's our GIF. GIFs does have a lot of different options. For now, we're just going to keep everything at high quality, full colors and everything. At the very bottom, here is your animation of loop. You can tell it to loop forever. You can even play it back and make sure that it works. It will play a little bit slower than normal. There we go. Now when I save it, we'll call this one horse. Halswa. I will replace it. Now I've got a different GIF that when I press it, it will play like normal. The main difference is, don't just do a File and Save As. Go to File, Export, and save it for the web. Make sense? Okay, so that'll be the first one. I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes to work through this one. Once we reach a stopping point, I'm going to show you the next GIF that we'll work through for this as well. So let me turn over your computer back to you. The second kind of animation will use the different car view GIFs on this one. In this case, I've given you a variety of different views. These will be static images that we want to transition between each one of these. And for this one, this will be the second part of, there we go. Here's stuff. So I'm going to open these up and drag one of them into there. I'm going to start with car number 6. In this case, the last one will be the first one. As with the other ones, I want to place each one on its own layer. So for 5, drag it onto here. 4, drag it onto here. 3, 2, and 1. And there's that. Next thing, make our frame animation, and you can see it's loaded up from here. We'll make a new, I'm going to set this to be 1 second. Make a new one. In my second frame, I want to transition from this shot into this shot. Now, if I was to do it this way, it would just look like this. Let's loop it forever. And it's transitioning back and forth. This will give you a concussion. Not concussion. Seizure. That's what I'm trying to go for. What I want to do is gradually transition from one thing to the other as well. To do this, rather than turning off the eyeball, we're not going to do that. I want to lower the opacity of this very gradually. So it looks like it's fading transition from one to the other. Notice now, frame 1 still looks like this. Frame 2 looks like this. What's the difference? I just changed the opacity. I didn't click on the eyeball. Keep that in mind. That's the magic trick. I lowered the opacity of frame 1. If I click in between both of these, another option I can choose is this icon right here. This is your tween animation of the frames. I've got them both selected, and when I click on it, notice my selection is here. I can tell it how many frames I want it to add and what I want to change. In our case, I can change either the position, the opacity, or the effects of each of the frames. What did I change up here? The opacity. So really, I'm not going to worry about position or effect. It's going to add 5 more frames in between what I have. Make sure I'm telling you this correct. 1 through 6. Yep, click to add 5 frames, and when I say OK, now check out what I've got. Frame 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all transition between there. And if I was to play it now, this is what it looks like. Pretty cool? This is called a tween animation because it's adding all of the frames in between 2 keyframes. This is a keyframe, and this is a keyframe. And so what I need to do to transition between each one of them is to, now that I've got this one, add another one. Whoop. What do I need to change up over here?
Visibility.
Visibility, this time for layer 2. I've already got layer 1 done. Layer 2 is what this one is, and I need to lower the opacity of it. So I'm transitioning between these two. I can select them both, hold down Shift. Make my tween of the opacity, and it adds on to here. So now it goes from there to there to there, there to there to there. Pretty cool? This doesn't necessarily do exactly what I want. I can't see what's working on. I want it to pause on each one of them. So here's another thing that I need to add to it. Every 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, every 7th frame is where I need to add a pause before it starts again. And this is where we can control that through the number of seconds. I'm going to add a, make sure I tell you correctly, a 2-second pause right there. And then it transitions to this one, 2-second pause. I said every 7th frame. We're actually adding, it's technically the 6th frame because we're adding 5 more between it. So this one, we'll do a 2-second pause. If I add a new frame, what is it also added to there? 2 seconds. Ew, that's going to mess me up. So I need to actually do this last. Let's undo that, put it back to 1 second delay. We'll add on another one anyway. New frame. In this case, what do I need to show? Need to actually show number 4. So I've selected number 3 and drop the opacity. Select between those two and do your tween. Then I can go back and I can add my 2-second pause on frame number 13. If you look on your instructions, just above number 18, I'm telling you what frames need to have the 2-second pause. Frame 1, 7, 13, 19, 25, and 31. This is going to get confusing because you need to understand what layer you're working on and what visibility needs to be for that layer. And you're going to have a lot of frames that you're working with. The main thing is go through and do your transitions first. Then go back and add your second pauses. From this one, got to drop the opacity. Select the 2 layers and add your tween between those 2. We'll let that be the last one. So it goes 1, 2, goes on, 1, 2, goes on. I didn't add a pause at the very first one as well. It needs to pause on this one. And you'll loop back to that one. Pretty cool? So that's what we're doing. We're looping back to front. The other thing was, let me show you this one last thing. We'll add a 2-second pause to here. I need to loop back to layer 1. So if this was the last one, we created a new tween, I would go back up to layer 1, bring my opacity back up to 100%. Then I would tween between those two as well. One, two, change. 1, 2, change. Oop, then add the pause and it goes back to the middle of those as well. Make sense? Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to y'all, let you